It certainly did seem that way.
And we are live! Hello, my grots and gits, all you super happy crimpers out there. Super exciting to have you here. This is a video that. Oh, geez, sorry about that. Okay, now that sorry about that, real quick. So this has been a video that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and with the finishing of the recent Tactical Tortoise tournament, that this is just the perfect time to talk about pairings matrices. How can you learn pairings? How can you become a much better, much more knowledgeable player about Warhammer? Figuring out how to play into certain armies versus which armies pair well. It's really, really important. And in order to do that, what I did is I have brought my fearless captain of our team in the Tactical Tortoise League, and one of my dearest friends in the world, Mr. Shetzel. You guys, if you're in the Discord, you know Shetzel. He's my admin, and he is a complete freaking rock star, so we're really blessed to have him here. I see a bunch of you guys in the chat. Sindra, you're from ATL, bro? I'm from ATL, man. Holy crap, we can be best friends forever. So we've got a bunch of people here. I don't know if Trevi's going to pop in. I really hope he does. He let me post this on the Tactical Tortoise Discord because he's a super good guy. He ran a great tournament, so I do appreciate him for organizing everything. Hopefully he pops into the chat, and then we can chat with him as well. But Mr. Shetzel, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yep. I am me. I do a lot of pairing stuff in our 5-man, so I've been doing it for a while now. Helped prepare pairing for Team Norway and such when we went to WTC.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we do make a good team in the 5s, that's for sure.
Listen, I'm loving our 5-man teams. We are also currently in a team in the Stat Check League, and we're about to start one for the Try Hard League as well. So we're all over the place on these TTS tournaments, and they're great. And if you guys haven't joined these TTS tournaments yet, you should, because they're really, really awesome. So what I think I want us to do is I want us to just get started on a few things that are really important to consider as far as our pairings matrix, or as far as just teams tournaments in general. There's just a few things to consider. Forgive me, I didn't. My PowerPoint skills are shitty. So there's a few things that I really think are super important. And Shetel, if you have anything to say, please jump in and tell me what your thoughts are, because you are the master of the pairings. So one thing to really consider when you're talking about these matchups is you have to think about guaranteed points in teams. It's a little bit different than individual tournaments where you can say, hey, I'm just going to go balls to the wall and I'm going to try to win by 1 point, blah, 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 blah. Well, in teams tournaments, not everyone on your team is expected to win. As a matter of fact, some of the people on your team, we might actually take armies that are intentionally going to lose. But they're intentionally going to lose by just a small margin into anyone. And that is the entire point. So you really have to consider the guaranteed amounts of points that your army can make. Another really big thing to talk about is the mission and the map pool, because that's going to dramatically change the types of armies you can bring. One issue I know I ran into on this particular tournament for Tactical Tortoise was I wasn't paying attention to the maps, and that was my fault. So I built an army that actually had a really hard time deploying on several of the maps. And that's something I'm going to have to strongly consider for other team tournaments that we're in. It's my fault for not checking those maps first. So that's a really big deal. The other things that I think are just really critical for us to think about are who's going to score big, who's going to score by a little bit, and who's going to be building. And you're going to see different types of armies and teams, and you'll see in individuals. You'll see huge skew builds because you can kind of protect those skew builds against their natural counters in the pairings process. So what I mean by big scores versus small scores, there's a really good army in the meta right now called Votan. But one of the things that happens with Votan is many times they only score by they only win by a few points. So while you might expect them to win, you don't expect them to win you big points in the team setting. And before we go any further and I confuse people too much, Shuttle, would you mind just breaking down the way that we score in teams, like the process and how that goes?
Absolutely. In teams, you have what we call the Leviathan score. We used to call it like the Nephilim score, the whatever score, right? Whatever game pack we have. Those are the points you score on the table, which is from 0 to 100. 10 automatic if you painted. And then you take the differential of that score and you roughly divide it by 5. There are some breakpoints here and there, but every 5 point you have in a differential, gets added to yours and subtracted from the opponent. So a 10-10 is a draw. Then there is 0 to 5 in the differential. If you score 6 points more than your opponent, it becomes an 11-9 in your favor. And so forth until you are above 50 points. And if you are above 50 points, it is a 20-0. And that score is then cumulatively added to the team. And then if you reach the break point for a win, which in fives is 56 points, then you win the round. So then any other points other than that 56 ultimately do not matter for a win, but you do need to consider grabbing as many points as possible for potential tiebreakers and placements later in the tournament. So if you think that you're not going to win at the end of the tournament, you might maybe make some risky moves so that you secure like a second place or something.
Yeah, but who would ever score second place in a tournament?
And we certainly don't aim for it.
So this is basically the things that we have to think about. Do you have anything else to think about the what I just put here? Your guaranteed points, mission maps, SKU builds. Anything else that you want to comment on that before we start getting into our pairing process and how we made them?
A thing to consider is that once we get into the pairing process, this will become a bit clearer.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to think about who will be designated defenders and who will be designated attackers, because that matters a lot. Because when you do the compositions, at least for fives, there will be 2 defenders in every round. For eights, there will be more, but in eights, there's a bit different thought process to going into who you end up bringing back to the later part of the rounds. You can consider fives as essentially the last half of an 8-man pairing, and 4-man teams is more like the first half. So when we and we didn't do this for this particular tournament, which we probably should. We did for the stat check. We've been thinking more about that for the vibe check league. We needed someone to be a very dedicated first defender. Someone that, as you say, small scorers. That means that they win little but lose high. Right? So 8-point losses, 12-point wins. That is something we needed and something that I probably should have built more towards in my particular list. But then again, this was right after invasion. We were tired. I was a bit ill. Lists became weird.
Perhaps we
Um,
we can show a little picture real quick so that we can explain what the first defender is. Should we do that now?
yeah, sure.
Cool. Let's do that just so that everyone follows pretty good. So I'm just going to show a picture of how we actually did the pairing process for our first round, and then Shuttle will go through and he'll break down how we actually made our matrices for our predictions, and then why we got the pairings that we got. But this will be the picture that just kind of breaks down for you what we mean when we say the actual pairings. So I'll just get this over here. All right. So if we're looking here, Shuttle, I don't know if you can see my screen right now, but I basically got our pairings down
Yeah,
for us.
it's a bit delayed.
Oh, okay, cool.
So, first round. We did not we did not get a proper matrix in for the first round because a lot of us were busy. So we were missing the entire Chaos Knight matrix, but it ended up okay-ish.
Hmm.
And it sort of shows here in the results, which we'll get to. Because in the first round of any team tournament, especially especially in like long running ones like this, where you don't exactly know who you're pairing against, your first matrix will probably always be a little bit optimistic. So a thing we identified here was that typically our Chaos Space Marine has all good matchups, but one he knows nothing about.
Maybe I can just switch here. I'll just switch to this one.
So that's one of the concerns for like who goes first should typically be prepared, but we didn't prepare that.
Hmm.
Then I look at the matrix, I see, okay, this has so many of these matchups, this has so many of those matchups. If we then make sure that we pick away the bad ones so that all our random ones at the end become good ones. That's sort of like the main idea, right? You take away the bad ones so that the randoms can only be good. Because that way you can control your losses and all the random will be good wins, in theory.
So essentially, and just real fast, we have a super chat from Mr. John Thacker who wants to throw out a big wah. Thank you so much. A big wah to you as well, my friend. Appreciate you. But if we're looking at this, this is essentially what we did for our predictions for the very first round. So the way Shuttle described our predictions, you score like an 11-9 would be a 6-point win, essentially. So we have our players on the left side, Leif Sondra, Jonathan Schettelageyer, and then we have the matchups that we had on the front side, so on the top. So let me see if I can I'm going to move Shettel's picture so that we can see the names of everything. So we had to figure out how is our army going to perform into each individual matchups. So if you look at my predictions, for example, my orcs, I thought I was going to score 14 against the Tyranids list, and it was a endless swarm based Tyranids list. I thought I would score 8 points against Black Templars because we get to look at the opponent's list, and so I'm pretty confident I lose against the Black Templars in that matchup. So I put an 8 down. Hey guys, I think we're going to lose. I think it's a fairly small loss though. If I see the Tau army, I believe I'm going to have a good win. So I put a 14 down. And a 14 would translate to like a 21-point win. So that would be like 81 to 60 in normal singles victory points. If I go into the Orcs on their team, I believe my Orcs will win by a small margin. I think I'm going to get a 12 points. And interestingly, as we see, I was actually pretty accurate on that because I did get that matchup and I ended up with an 11-point victory, as if we look at the bottom there. And then if I run into the Death Guard, I think I can also get a small victory. So I had to predict based off of what I saw. And these predictions are super, super, super important because if you're accurate, then your team can rely upon you to get those points. If you're inaccurate and you think, oh, I'm going to table this guy, I'm going to get 20 points, and then you end up only scoring 8 points, you can throw the entire game for your team. So we do the best that we can to be accurate. So this is what we're talking about as far as the matrix itself is concerned. I just wanted to step in and clarify that for people.
And you see two examples of things ending up being very inaccurate here. My matchup and Sondro's matchup ended up being wildly inaccurate. And that probably is what cost us the win. Because if we had identified earlier, and that's mostly on my end, because I'm not exactly sure what happened in Sondro's match, so I can't say that. But for my matchup, I definitely disrespected the amount of tricks that a Swarm Minion army could have. I had no problem removing 40 Gaunts a turn. But that was not enough when there's that much battle shock going around that you can't get to. So you ultimately don't score points. Because my list did not have the amount of units that was necessary to sit on objectives so that you can win some of those coin flips and actually hold them. Which meant that ultimately he just scored a lot more points. But if I had recognized that, particularly with the mission we were playing, with Taken Hold and Hidden Supplies, I could have secured a 50 primary.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, it was the primary that I lost on.
So
that is something that, you should recognize. And if you don't, you might end up costing your team the win.
And as you can see, one of the things that we would have loved to have had our Chaos Knight player get his matrix filled out, because if we had known that he was going to have, say, a 20-point win into Tau, which, I mean, of course you can't know that, but let's say he had this filled out and we were relying on him to get that 20 point, then there's every possibility that into our matchups that were a closer win, say our CSM player into Black Templars, who we knew was going to be a smaller win, we could have been like, hey, I want you to play more defensively. It's okay for you to take a loss in this matchup because we have the points in the bank. At which point, if we had him play a little more defensively and say he only lost with an 8 instead of with a 2, we would have taken the round, if that makes sense. So having these accurate predictions on your matrix is super, super important. But essentially, just kind of going through this matchup right here, we've got Shuttle ended up underperforming on this pairing matrix. And Shuttle, would you say that was because it was a game error, or it was because it was a matchup estimation error?
Both, because the estimation error led to game errors, because I should have recognized
Makes sense.
that I should not push for the 15. I should have recognized that I should hold for like a 5-8.
That makes perfect sense. And so what we do is we take that information that we learned in the first round and we'll apply it to the second round, as we'll see in just a moment. So overall, that is the matrices that we had, and then we'll just kind of break down how the actual pairing process went for us. So if you look here, this is the actual pairing process. I'm going to shift the picture here again. So you have what's called a defender. So the very first person to put down, actually, Shuttle, why don't you explain this? You'll explain this way better than I will.
Yeah, so the way the pairing process works, both teams select who their first defender is. And they then put it down and reveal. Both teams then select 2 attackers that are going to go into the enemy defender. The teams then deliberate. Who do we pick? Who do we want to remove for later? Who can we get the best results from? All of those are considerations you have to take into account. And then you put down the attacker. And then the opponent put down his attackers. You hand back the rejected, and then you reveal. What happens after that is that you roll to see who gets table choice. And table choice matters a lot, because there are some matchups that might be, let's say it's a 5 if they don't get a good table. But if they get a good table, they can secure a 10. And those 5 points matter a lot when you want to convert draws to victories. And then it follows from that, right? So then you have your second defender. You pick 2 more attackers. But after that, the one that is not picked as the attacker goes to the refused slot. And then the 2 players that are refused go into each other. And the rest are attacker defenders. And that is where the whole tactic about removing bads early comes into play versus getting goods early. Like for this matchup, we sort of went with a goods early type mentality, because we didn't really know what the Chaos Knight would be, so we might have, overdone it a bit. If we had known, maybe some of the things we now know, maybe we should have angled for throwing Chaos Knights into the Tau Empire.
Sure.
Because he has historically now performed very well into Tau.
Yeah, so I think what we learned on this particular pairing on the very first round is that we learned we don't necessarily need to take the best matchups for us. What we need to do is we need to remove the worst matchups for us. Is probably something where we may prioritize going into the other rounds. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, it is things we knew.
Yeah.
But because it's the first pairing, you always fuck up the first pairing.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. So let's look at the second round. What happened with the second round? So the second round, we were in round 2. This was the Ritual, Scrambler Fields, and Sweeping Engagement.
It should be said, though, that the first round was a 5-point gap to the win. And those 5 points could have easily gone from either me or someone.
Sure, absolutely. So we look at round 2 here. We have the Ritual, Scrambler Fields, and Sweeping Engagement. And as you can see, our pairing matrices are really different on this particular matchup. So I'm just going to go back to round 1 real quick. If you look at round 1, we're basically all green, with most of us not really ever underestimating ourselves. Then when we go to the next matchup, I think we got much more realistic. Maybe I'm not speaking correctly, but we got a little more realistic about our matchups, and I think we were willing to accept the fact that we weren't just automatically going to win every single matchup. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing in teams. You have to estimate what you know you can score, not what you hope to score against people. So on this pairings, you see our Chaos Knight player says he's going to get an 8 into Dark Angels, an 11 into Chaos Space Marines, 6 into Orcs, 12 into Eldari, and a 10 into Tyranids. For me, you see that I had estimated a 10 into Dark Angels, 12 into Chaos Space Marines, and 8 into Orcs, because the Orc player who I saw, he was running 18 Squig Hogs, and 18 Squig Hogs countered the style of Orc list that I had. So I knew, okay, cool, that's not a good matchup for me. I can hold on to points, but it's not a good matchup. Our Eldar a 12 and our Tyranid is a 12. So in this one, I think we did a much better job filling out our pairings matrix because we were able to plan more for these potential losses just from the standpoint of us knowing that we didn't necessarily match up really well into these armies, and we were more honest with ourselves. And the result that we got actually ended up, I think, going pretty well. So as you can see here, it looks like our CSM player went into Dark Angels and ended up with a draw. Then we had our Chaos Knights go into Chaos Space Marines. He estimated an 11, and then he scored a 13. So he overperformed, which was great. Then we had me going into Orcs. I thought I was going to score an 8, but I scored a 6. So I underperformed. But I think that's still within the realms of flexibility that we have to plan for. Then
Typically, we assume that there is going to be a 2-point swing in any way in any game when it comes to things like dice and randomness.
has to happen. Then we had Shuttle, who went the exact opposite direction of what happened in the first round. And he went into the Elves where he thought he was going to draw, and he just saw blood and he went for it, and he got us a 20 points. So he got us a perfect score in that round, which really, really helped to make up for the underperformance that I had in this round. And then lastly, our Eldar player just overperformed massively into the Tyranids as well, estimating 15 and 19. Shuttle, do you have anything to say about how we filled out this pairing matrix?
This time, we were a lot more honest and a lot more knowledgeable about what we were going into, because now you have the shock of the first one. It's like, ah, shit, right. And a lot of yelling was done by a certain someone. Definitely not me. I do not yell. I do not have a loud voice.
Oh, actually, real fast, let me interrupt because we got Tota Face with a £3 super chat.
Hell
He's
yeah.
he's saying it's a nice battle report, and he's hoping for Orcs winning. Well, listen, bro, Orcs always win no matter what, so there's always going to be a wall. Thank you so much for your support. That support does mean the world. It is this is a labor of love, us getting this content out for you. So we super appreciate you. Sorry for interrupting, Shuttle.
No, absolutely not. Like, so, you know, after a first round, you get a little bit more realistic. You look a little bit more into what they do, and we had a little bit more time this time around because the pairings were the day after, and we hadn't just come off a major tournament, so everyone was a bit more relaxed, a little bit more looking into things. And I went to a lot of people and said, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" It's like, okay, okay. And
So
there's a lot of that going on when you are the captain and you are the one preparing the matrices. If something feels wrong to you, double check with your players that estimate is actually looked into. If they've done their due diligence with it, then fine. They might be wrong. That's fine. You're allowed to be wrong, but you're not allowed to not do your due diligence into the list.
right. So let's look at how we actually did this pairing process and maybe walk us through that. So why did we choose which defenders and how that went down? So let me pull this up.
Yeah. This time I put a 5 for my Chaos Space Marine estimate. I always put a 5 for Chaos Space Marines into the Necrons because I know just how much they can fuck with me. So what I was trying to do here was to bait them into doing CSM Dark Angels into me, and then take away the CSM for everyone else. Because
Nice.
typically they are overperformers, and it takes away a very drawish bad matchup for everyone else. And I also think that the CSM player was one of their best, or at least the one with the most experience. I don't entirely remember. Those are also things that if you know, you know. I have also historically overperformed into CSM just because of matchup experience with the Necrons and so forth.
So you put
That's
down.
not
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
entirely what happened though, because they put down their CSM as a first defender, and that's something you can kind of recognize in the Matrix as well. Because if you look at our Matrix, their CSM looks kind of first defenderish with how we've scored it, in that there are two bad matchups, and then those bad matchups are kinda okay either way, right? It's a small loss for them. It would have been a 9 and an 8 loss, whereas they could have gotten like a 14 or a 15 win if you look at the matrix in reverse. So that's also something I kind of gambled on. It's like, okay, their CSM does look kind of first defenderish. If they don't do a CSM first defender and we do a Necron first defender, we'll probably do pretty good. And then they gave me a gift like manna from heaven, and they gave me the option to pick the Eldar. Because one of the things that many don't recognize, and this is probably something I should have put into the Matrix as higher than a 10, is that Necrons really screw up Eldar. Eldar do not have the firepower to deal with the warrior blobs at all.
Can't do it.
They can easily deal with Lishgard, but they can't deal with 20 warriors. If you just take those 20 warriors and just up the board, they can't deal. Especially because it was the ritual, right? So that is when the round and the pairings align to give you a higher score than you normally would have done in like a Purge the Foe situation, for example. Because in Purge the Foe, the opponent could have picked off the smaller things to get primary points and get closer to that 10.
Mm-hmm.
But in this setting, he didn't really know that this was a thing in the matchup, and I brutally taught it to him.
With a loving smile, though.
Of course.
So then, for our then we attacked, and they chose Chaos Knights into the Chaos Space Marines. And then for the second defenders, how did you come across for putting our second defender down?
So what I do is that I hide the roles of who's been picked.
Okay.
So I hide that row, I hide that column. I see, okay, they picked our Chaos Knights. We take away that. We take away their Chaos Space Marines.
Okay.
What are we left with then? We are left with you with a 10, 8, 12. We are left with our CSM, which is question mark 5, 10. Or we are left with Eldar, which is 12, 12, 15. That means that our highest loss is an 8 if we do the random attacker. Like if you're refused into something bad, or if you're picked into something bad. So it's like, okay, our highest loss then is an 8. We don't know how the Space Marine matchup is going to go, but I was confident that that was 10-ish.
Cool.
Around 10.
So you kind of just overrided as the coach the fact that we didn't really have a okay, cool.
Yeah.
But you did
So
did our pairings for that.
Somebody didn't know what his Dark Angel matchup was. I kind of assumed, and that's what I went with. Like he had a 10, and a 6. That means that if he goes as the defender, we can pick away the 6.
Yep. And then basically everything else kind of just falls into place, right? Because there's really only two rounds.
At that point, things just align. And if you've done well in the first 2 defender picks and attacker picks, the alignment of the last 2 should be in your favor.
Cool.
And then they clearly were. We got the 8 loss, we got the 20 win.
So this was a big win for us. We go right up into the winners bracket, and then we had to move on. So in round 3, we go at a take and hold, a chilling reign, and a search and destroy. So some of the things to really immediately start consider when you see search and destroy is, okay, we have close deployments. What does this immediately mean? Well, it immediately means melee-hungry armies are probably going to start being a little more scary and a little more performy, if that makes sense to you guys. So I immediately, knowing as I'm I crump. I hit melee, whether I'm playing orcs, I'm playing custodes, or now world eaters. I'm going into melee. So the second I see search and destroy, I can start increasing my estimation against certain armies. So I think that has a really big influence in the way that I personally paired my matrices on this round, and I think that influences everyone. So if you're a gunline army, you're going to naturally probably want to decrease your estimated score against melee armies on this type of deployment, if that makes sense. So if we look at our pairings here, we have our Chaos Knights player going in 13 in blood. Well, I'll just go through mine because I remember my matchups. So I went for a 12 into Blood Angels, an 8 into Necrons, a 12 into Eldari. The reason why I keep having these high estimates against Eldar guys is because I'm pretty sure Orcs just stomp Eldar in general. I know a lot of tournament results might not bear that out, but I'm pretty freaking sure it's true. Um, I had a 14.
Eldar generally struggle into pressure, which is why Necrons are good against Eldar, because they don't die on the way to them.
Yep. We had the 12, the 14 in the Tau, and the reason why 14 in the Tau on here is especially simply because the fact that it's a very close deployment, and whenever you're playing in a Tau, it's a race to turn 3. Can you kill them by turn 3 before they get their sustained hits 2 everywhere? And if it's this close deployment, yeah. So I'm going straight for them. And then the last matchup was Orcs, and I thought I had the edge against that Orc matchup as well. Chateau, do you want to just kind of quickly talk about the way that you did your pairings?
Yeah.
So he was the fourth row, the Necrons.
Blood Angels, it's a pressure list. It's search and destroy, take and hold. I can typically absorb it. They did not have any of the larger killing units, if I remember. They did have an aggressor squad, but if it's not in the Land Raider, it's easier to deal with because they have to deep strike it via Weeks of Sanguinius, which is a 2-up roll. You have to place outside of 9. That means you can control it and you can protect the warrior blood from it. That should be an easy to secure 10 because nothing else really threatens that blob.
Mm-hmm.
They had a 60 Necron list,
So many.
which is death to anyone but me and Sondre. Like I think you genuinely overestimated that list
Really?
severely. Yeah.
Okay.
So then I took my faction knowledge there and basically said, no, that's not happening. I need to get that list into me or Sondre, or we are fucked.
Okay.
Um,
And we were, because it ended up being a horrible.
yeah.
So you were correct.
Yeah. I assumed I would get a 6. I made some gameplay errors that ended up not making that because I overplayed my hand and I should have just gone for the 6 instead of potentially sort of overwhelming him. I failed some like 3-inch charges that would have gotten me on an objective instead of him. And if that had happened, I would have probably gotten a 10. Like, I gambled when I probably shouldn't have. I can't remember if my game was at the later part of the round or early. But that's also something that you need to determine, right? In these asynchronously played games, is that if you're already good, secure points. If you're early,
Right.
probably don't take risks.
So I think that's one thing that we find, because sometimes we find that when we're going into our last matchup, even if it's a great matchup for us, if we've already basically secured the win and all we need to do is not have a devastating loss, what we do is we'll tell our last player, bro, don't try to win. Just play super safe and get us the 4 points we need to guarantee our win for the round, or to guarantee the tie that we're going to get for the round. And that's something that we end up doing quite a bit actually now, as we start calculating the round points first. So let's talk about the pairing process here. So I'm going to show the pairings off. Okay, and let me just kind of maximize this a wee bit. All right, so I've got the pairings pulled up here. This is the table, and if you want to kind of walk us through how you did the defenders and everything.
Yeah, I assumed they would use the Eldar offensively, as most people do. If they defended Eldar, then that's also good for us because that means the Chaos Knight doesn't get it, right? We picked Chaos Knight first defender, and that's good for us because then he can pick away the Necrons and whatever else they take. He took Tau. He's been really good into Tau for multiple rounds in a row now.
We love that matchup.
And that's great for us. They put down Orcs as defender, which makes sense in our matrix. The only one that's kind of bad for them is CSM. Orcs make a great first defender for them in that case.
And it's perfect for me because I love orcs. So give me the third orc mirror match. I love it. I'm happy.
Yeah, we decided to then attack with the CSM and orcs, knowing they would pick the orcs.
Mm-hmm.
So then with the third defender, I put down myself because then once the others are gone there's no more real threats to me except for that Necron list.
Right.
That is why I assume they have it, is to counter other not 60 warrior Necrons. So that's what I assume, right? I assume that okay, they're coming for me now, and they did.
Yeah.
And so I picked it. But then there was an interesting one because I had the option of sending of I essentially gambled.
Hmm.
Do I take the Necrons or do I take the Space Marines? Because it's a 4-point. But if I can guarantee like at least 1 or 2 points where I know that Geir will get nothing, that is probably better no matter who's refused.
That makes sense.
So then that's the choice I made. Like I conferred with like our pairing expert in a sense. It's like, what would you have done, right? One of the people in the sparring crew of pairings for Team Norway. Like, what would you have done? He's like, no. You take away those 0 at
Yeah.
any point of the day, right? That's what you always do. You take away the bad whenever you can, because then the finals, no matter who they pick, is fine.
Sure.
Now, for some reason that I am not entirely sure of, they picked the Eldar Mirror.
It's fascinating.
And I think that's probably the best they could have gone for, because then that is an 8 and a 10 on the pairing instead of a 15 and 15.
Yep.
So that's probably what we should have assumed happened, and it happened, so it's fine.
Okay.
Then Sondra ended up overperforming by
What was
1
it?
more point. Then I lost, so it's fine.
Yep. Right. Because he had estimated 8, but he ended up with a 14, and you had
Yeah, and Leif ended up with a 17 instead of 12.
Yep. So that's how that went down.
So ultimately, like even if I had lost that, if you add up what we had, it was 8, 6 for 14, 24, 36, and a 48. So we had paired for a draw. So either way, right, those 5 points I lost were still within draw parameters.
Exactly.
So whatever we paired for would have probably still been fine.
So we have a few comments here, and they were asking if it's common to see mirror matchups. And Bjorn's in the chat. Hey Bjorn, what's up, buddy? He goes 3 mirrors and a 5-man. That's unique. And yeah, it was a little bit unique on this one. I don't think that I've seen 3 mirrors and a 5-man before, but I do think mirrors are really common in team tournaments because a lot of times you might see something. It's like no one has a good answer to it, but you also know you have the same list that no one has a good answer to. So sometimes you just ram the mirror. You just force the mirror. Like if no one wants to play orcs, for example, sometimes you run orcs into the orcs. Go ahead.
I think that's the opposite, because a
Okay.
mirror, if it's a true mirror,
Hmm.
you typically don't want it. You don't want coin flips.
Right.
But if you're in this case, it wasn't a true mirror for the Necrons, for example, because I was running 20 warriors, 10 Lich Guard. He was running 60 warriors.
Might as well
So
be very
that's
different armies. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's not a mirror.
Hmm.
And the Eldar we had was Inari versus Spinners,
Mm.
which is also not technically a mirror.
Sure.
So it's hard to say, but in 5-mans, the option for a mirror happens more often than not. The one mirror you often see a lot is the Eldar mirror, because nobody wants to play Eldar.
Except for me.
I think that's something that needs to be adjusted after the data slate, mentality-wise.
Probably.
But yeah.
Yeah, I don't honestly. Just as an aside, I don't think Eldar is nearly as good as a lot of people think they are. I mean, I still think they're good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're nearly as scary as a lot of people still seem to think they are.
And because it is 5 mans, and a lot of people are bringing the same kind of teams, like you always see CSM, you always see Eldar, all that kind of stuff. There will be more mirrors in a 5 than there would be in an 8.
Right. So let's go on into the last round and how we paired this one. So that was another win for us. We took that win as well. And we go into round 4. So this was priority targets, Chilling Reign, and Crucible of Battle. And once again, it's always really important to read the mission, right? Because on priority targets, you're only scoring 10 points per round, and then you score high at the end of the game. So armies where you know that you expect to be tabled, or you expect to have very few models left, you know you need to underestimate on this particular map, or on this particular deployment, or primary, I guess. It's simply because if I know I'm playing orcs and I typically only survive with 2 to 3 units, the likelihood of me holding 2 to 3 objectives with my 2 to 3 units that are survived is pretty low. So you need to start underestimating based off of how your army typically plays. If your army is typically all totally still alive, no problem. If your army is typically gone by that point, maybe start underestimating. So make sure you take into account the primary. So here you can see us. Once again,
I am
go
just
ahead.
to preface first. I spotted an error in the result. The 14 and the 0 should swap places.
So the 14 was under 1, and here, I'll just fix. Oh yeah, I actually can't fix that. So this is a picture. Okay, so we'll make sure that we clarify that. So in our first round, we had our Chaos Knight player, and he played against the Tau, and he got a 14, not a 0. Forgive us on that one, guys. But he had estimated it was going to be a 12. Then we had Shettle playing the Necrons into the Tyranids. He had estimated a 12 and ran a 9. We had our Eldar player playing into their Eldar player. He had estimated a draw, but got a big 20. Very, very good for us. Then we had me running into Grey Knights. I had estimated an 8, and I got a 9. I was actually really pleased with that. That was an interesting match. There are a few comeback mechanics in that one. And then lastly, we had our CSM into their CSM, estimating a 10, and he ended up getting a 0, actually. Because just for this picture, guys, the 0 and the 14 should be swapped because we made an error on those
Yeah,
results. Sorry about that.
this round was a bit weird
Yes.
because while the pairings happened as we kind of wanted them to, there were some issues with scheduling because many of them were based in Singapore and the Pacific coast of the US. That's like an 8-hour time zone behind us and an 8-hour time zone in front of us. So our CSM and their CSM had a scheduling conflict where they said they would play at 3.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't specify if that was PM
Oh
or
no.
AM.
Oh no, I didn't realize that actually. This is new to me.
Yeah, so that is why that ended up being like that because they couldn't find another scheduling thing. They had originally agreed to it, yada yada. Now those things happen,
Okay.
and it's like, okay, shit, what do we do now?
Gotcha.
Then we get your result for a 9.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get the Eldar result for a 20. So now, okay, we're at 29. That's good. That's good. Then we get Life's result at a 14. Okay, we are here. We are here. How much do we now need for us to win? Right? It's like, technically, I only need 2 points to win.
That's the beauty of teams.
And so it's like, okay, do we just like talk this game out very quick and then just like, it's like, yeah, there's no way I'm putting it to that low. No way.
And that was our third win of the tournament. So let's look at the pairings tables and why did we take these pairings? How did this occur? And then we'll answer a few questions when we're finished here. So this is the pairings
Or
table.
rather, it wasn't to a win, it was to secure a draw.
Right,
To be
just
specific.
mm-hmm.
Because we knew that even if we won, we would not take first place in the tournament. So I was very upfront with my opponent. I am going to secure a draw for 2 points. There is nothing you can do on priority targets to stop me getting 2 points. And there's a chance I can get more. If I get a 20, which is a thing I could rush for and still secure 2 points, then we actually win. So do you want to just, you and me both play it very cautiously so we both secure a draw so we end up best possible? They're like, yeah, that sounds fair.
Collusion. Collusion.
Yeah, but that's a thing
Yeah, I
that
know.
happens because
Happens all
everyone
the time.
knows what the result's going to be.
I'm just poking the bear. So this is the actual pairings that we went through here. Can you write down? Can you kind of give us a brief rundown why the people we had, the defenders that we had and stuff?
Same as last time. I have one bad matchup
Mm-hmm.
that we kind of want to get away.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really bad ones here for us that we don't want.
Mm-hmm.
So we assumed that, and these were like one of the best opponents we had when it came to pairing. This was kind of a struggle to do, even though the Matrix looks a bit better than the last one.
Right.
Pairing wise, because I feel like the pairing in round 3 was easier.
Okay.
But the Matrix in round 4 looks better.
Okay.
So I can't remember who they gave in addition to the Tyranids. I think it was the Tau. But I wanted to shuffle that further back because I kind of wanted to get that into life.
Right, because he had overperformed so much.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a super chat from Mr. Bjorn giving us a big wah, you beautiful man. And it's his first super chat. Holy crap, look at that, man. I'm so pleased. I'm honored that you're here for us, man. Thank you so much. All
Hell
right.
yeah. They put out their CSM. We were kind of confident in a 10, and I think we also attacked with our orcs into them. So I think they just shuffled you along until the end.
Yeah, sounds right.
Our sixth defender, we picked our Chaos Knights. We attacked with Eldar and Orcs into Eldar. They again picked the mirror because I think many people underestimate the amount of firepower that that Inari list can put into the enemy and how quick it is at doing it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we bait that Eldar mirror all the time, and it just seems to keep working. I don't know why, and it fucking annoys me, but it just keeps working, and I wish I could dissect it further.
That's the way it goes. So there's a couple. I think there's a lot of really good lessons that we learned from this pairing process. And one of the things that I really take away from going through these matrices and these pairings, everyone who's watching, is this is actually how I learned the meta. This is really how I get a really fundamentally strong understanding of matchups and how I need to change my list for individuals as well. Because when I'm going through these pairings, I have to figure out, okay, will I get an 8 against this army, or will I get a 15 against this army, or will I get a whatever? Well, when you actually dissect what your opponent's list does and what your list does on individual missions, that is how you learn those missions, and that is actually how you learn how you're going to score against these armies. That makes you a much better player once you actually have because you have to actually dissect your opponent's list here. You have to actually figure it out. It's not just like looking at it and being like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to do whatever I normally do. It really gives you a fundamentally strong understanding of everything. So I highly encourage all of you to jump into a team tournament. Support Trevi. Hop into the Tactical Tortoise. I know at Happy Crumping we are going to host one of these as well. I'm not entirely sure on a timeline on that, but we're definitely going to. But yeah, so this is actually makes you a much, much better player. Shuttle, if you had a few tips for people who wanted to learn how to do pairings themselves a little bit better, what would those be?
I would get a diverse group of friends when it comes to armies, and then sit down and discuss matchups.
Sure.
Take a GW mission. Look at the layouts for that deployment in WTC or GW layouts. and then sit and look. If it's this mission on this layout and we're that army into that army, how would you roughly move? And then you talk out the mission. You don't play it necessarily. And if there's something you heavily disagree on, take it to the table. Play it out. See if that's actually how it rolls. Then by doing that a lot, you sort of get this understanding of how many points can I guarantee before my opponent disagrees with the fact that I can get those points. And then you get a baseline.
Aha, that's great advice.
That's the baseline you always put down.
Perfect.
And then if you're confident in that you are correct and the opponent is wrong, then obviously then you increase the estimate by that. But always take that baseline of I think this is what I can get without my opponent contesting it in any way, right? If both me and my opponents agree that this is what I should get minimum, then you have a baseline for estimates.
That's perfect. I think that's brilliant. And so we learned a lot of lessons on the pairings for this one, and we have actually applied all those lessons into our new vibe check stat check league that we're in. What's the stat check team league? It's called Vibe something. It doesn't matter.
It's a vibe check league hosted by Stat
Vibe check leagues hosted by Stat check. Ugh. Anyway, so we actually did a great pairings process round one, and we took our first round, which was really, really nice. I streamed my game. You guys can check that out as a VOD. It's on the channel. It was my orcs against the Eldar. And we're actually really confident. We've got we learned a lot of lessons, and we're going to continue going forward. And we're going to keep you guys updated on how these teams pairings processes go. Remember, if you guys are looking to become much better players, you need to be getting reps in, and team tournaments are an amazing way to do it. So support Trevi. Hop on over to the Tactical Tortoise. I've got his Discord linked down in the description below. So make sure you check him out. He's running individual tournaments. He's running team tournaments. You can also check out Tryhard and Copenhammer if you're in Europe. They do a lot of individuals and team tournaments as well. They're fantastic. And then, of course, the guys over at StatCheck are awesome. And you can also subscribe and become a member of Happy Crump and Wargaming because we will be getting our own tournaments coming out as well. So if you guys like all that stuff, if you like the content, hit the like, hit the subscribe, comment down below, argue with us, praise us, do whatever you want. It's really good for the algorithm, and I really, really appreciate all of your attentions. Thanks for being on tonight, guys. Hope you guys learned a lot. Shetel, any last words for tonight? Not ever.
I think we covered most of it. There are many things, many variables, things that haven't been discussed now, things that I will talk about for ages if someone asks me, but if nobody asks, nobody knows.
And where could they ask you? Perhaps in the members only side of the Happy Crump and Wargaming channel? Would that be a good place to ask you?
Exactly.
All right, Grats and Gids, my Happy Crump and Wargamers, thanks so much for your attention. We're going to go ahead and end the stream now. Hope you guys have an awesome freaking night. If you have follow-up questions, I do respond to all the comments on these videos, but you can also hop